Good evening, I'm Maham Kawa with the news-making headlines around the world. The cabinet meeting is briefed on the telephone calls by U.S. Secretary of State to the GCC foreign ministers regarding agreement with Iran. Dozens killed in fighting near Yemen's Aden port, delaying air deliveries. Hundreds of Palestinian refugees in the Yarmouk camp in Damascus flee after fighting intensifies. And Kenya launches airstrikes against militias in Somalia in retaliation for a terror attack in Kenya last week. In our first item, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah received at Sif Palace this morning His Excellency the Minister of Justice and Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs Yaqub Abdel Mohsen Al-Sana and Minister of Justice of the Democratic Republic of Algeria His Excellency Mr. At-Tayyib Loh and his accompanying delegation on the occasion of his visit to the country. The meeting was attended by His Excellency the Acting Minister of the Emiri Diwan Affairs, Advisor Khalid Abdullah Budai, and His Excellency the Undersecretary of His Highness the Crown Prince Diwan for Protocol and Ceremonies, Sheikh Mbarak Subah Al-Salim Mahmoud Al-Subah. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah received at Sif Palace this morning the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Cambodia to the State of Kuwait, Kim Quing, on the end of his tenure in the country. The meeting was attended by His Excellency the Undersecretary at His Highness the Crown Prince Diwan for Protocol and Ceremonies, Sheikh Mbarak Subah Al-Salim Mahmoud Al-Subah. His Excellency the Acting Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sheikh Subah Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Subah received at Sif Palace this morning His Excellency the Minister of Justice and Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs Yaqub Abdel Mohsen Al-Sana and the Minister of Justice of the Democratic Republic of Algeria His Excellency At-Tayyib Loh and his accompanying delegation on the occasion of his visit to the country. The Council of Ministers took note at the beginning of its weekly session today under the chairmanship of the Acting Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sheikh Subah Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Subah of the messages to His Highness the Emir from His Excellency President of the Republic of Benin Boni Yayi, His Excellency Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, and Her Excellency Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, thanking His Highness for the leading role being played by the State of Kuwait and His Highness the Emir in alleviating the suffering of the Syrian people. In a statement after the meeting, the Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah Al-Mbarak Al-Subah said the Council of Ministers was informed of the two messages from His Highness the Emir to His Highness Sheikh Jabal Al-Mbarak Al-Hamad Al-Subah, the Prime Minister, in which His Highness expressed thanks to His Highness the Prime Minister and to the members of the Cabinet, as well as other concerned agencies and individuals, for their great sincere efforts in the arrangements for the Third International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria in Kuwait. The messages also congratulated them for the conference's success. His Excellency the Acting Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs explained to the meeting the outcome of the conference, during which His Highness the Emir asserted to the Syrian people that the world community was standing beside them and feeling their sufferings. The State of Kuwait donated $500 million from the governmental and private sectors to support the Syrian people. The Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs said the Council of Ministers on this occasion expressed deep appreciation and pride in the initiatives of His Highness the Emir by hosting this conference in Kuwait and thanked the generous donations contributed by Kuwait society to relieve the Syrian people. The Council of Ministers also thanked the countries which participated in the conference. His Excellency Sheikh Subah Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Subah, the Acting Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, also briefed the meeting on the subjects which were discussed during the telephone call between His Excellency President Barack Obama of the United States of America and His Highness the Emir Sheikh Subah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah, as well as the content of the telephone calls by the U.S. Secretary of State to his counterparts in the GCC countries. Discussion in those telephone calls concentrated on the political accord reached by the 5+1 states with the Islamic Republic of Iran. The U.S. Secretary of State reiterated the U.S. commitment to the security and stability of the GCC member states. The Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs said the Council of Ministers also discussed the latest political issues in view of the recent developments at the Arab and international levels. Israel deduced a third of Palestinian tax money, with Palestinians threatening to take their unilateral actions to the International Criminal Court. Fatma Abdel Karim from Ramallah has more in this report.
The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said he would return the deducted portion of tax money back to Israel and threatened to go to the International Criminal Court if Israel continues to freeze the Palestinian tax revenues in such a unilateral manner.
They sent us back our money deducted by a third. This is our money and not a favor or a grant by you, we told them. We will only accept our full right. So we send you back the money and you either pay it in full or we go to arbitration or the court.
The freeze of funds continues for the fourth month now, and Israel continues to escalate its measures against Palestinians, not only through economic pressures, but also by standing between them and their basic rights, like that of freedom of worship. In Hebron, Israeli authorities unilaterally decided to close Al Ibrahimi Mosque during Jewish Passover holidays, banning Palestinians from their prayers and allowing only Jews to access it, a move that was strongly condemned by Palestinians.
The leadership is making calls with international parties to stop Israel from threatening Al Ibrahimi Mosque. And I think we will sue Israel for its actions against the Holy Aqsa Mosque and Al Ibrahimi Mosque, turning its back on 1 billion Muslims around the world.
Israel's unilateral practices are seen by Palestinian officials as acts of piracy. According to sources, the Palestinian Authority would file a complaint to the United Nations and the ICC to put pressure on Israel to stop its collective punishment. Fatma Abdel Karim, State of Kuwait Television, Ramallah, Palestine.
Houthi fighters and their allies clashed with local militias in the southern Yemeni city of Aden as gun battles and heavy shelling ripped through a downtown district near the city's port. At least 11 of President Hadi's combatants died in Aden's central Mualla district near the port, while 36 Houthi and allied fighters were killed. Meanwhile, Pakistan's parliament debated today whether to contribute military support to the Saudi-led coalition targeting rebels in Yemen following a request from Saudi Arabia. Pakistani defense minister said the Saudi leadership hoped Pakistan would contribute air, naval and ground support. Hundreds of Palestinian refugees made their way out of the Yarmouk camp in the southern suburb of the Syrian capital Damascus after the so-called Daesh group invaded the camp. Many of the Palestinian families who have escaped from Yarmouk camp took a nearby school as their temporary shelter. According to the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor of Syria, some 1,000 refugees fled the camp and hundreds more made it out the next days. According to reports, around 180,000 people are still trapped in the camp. Talks on ending the war in Syria were set to start in Moscow today, but the absence of key opposition groups meant there was little hope of progress in resolving the conflict. Syria's ambassador to the United Nations, Bashar al-Jafari, was heading the government delegation for the 4 days of meetings with members of the domestic tolerated opposition, the National Coordination Committee for Democratic Change. The Syrian internal parties have reached a preliminary agreement in an informal talks in late last January, but said last month at an interview that the new meeting could be a success only when all parties of the Syrian people are present. The head of a militant group in Egypt responsible for deadly attacks in the North African country has been killed in an exchange of fire with security forces in the capital city of Cairo. Earlier in the day, Ajnad Misr claimed responsibility for a bombing attack that killed a police officer and wounded 2 civilians on a bridge in the affluent Zamalek neighborhood of Cairo. The militant group also claimed responsibility for bombings outside Egypt's presidential palace and the foreign ministry last year, which killed 4 police officers. Ajnad Misr is accused of carrying out 26 raids on police forces, mostly in Cairo. The official media agency for Libya's militia-backed government says a suicide car bomb killed 6 people near the western city of Misrata. It says that the dead from bombing included a mother and her 2 sons, with 21 others injured. A security official from Misrata said most of the wounded were militiamen guarding a gate to the city, the apparent target of the attack. Militias from Misrata serve as a key power base for Libya's Tripoli-based government. Misrata has recently sent its militias to battle Islamic State-affiliated militants who control the central Libyan city of Sirte. Libya has 2 rival governments claiming legitimacy as their allied militias fight across the country. Kenyan fighter jets bombed positions of Al-Shabaab militant group in Somalia as a response to the assault last week, which had left 148 people dead at Garissa University. The warplanes targeted and destroyed 2 camps in the Gedo region used by Al-Shabaab to cross into Kenya. Kenyan Army spokesman said that the bombings are part of a continued process and engagement against Al-Shabaab. Rebels in Sudan's South Kordofan said they had captured a lorry carrying ballot boxes to polling stations for nationwide elections due next week, vowing to disrupt voting in the conflict-hit region. Spokesman Arno Lodi said the Sudan People's Liberation Army North will press its military campaign plan to stop elections in South Kordofan. Last month, the Sudan People's Liberation Army North announced its campaign to disrupt presidential and legislative elections slated for April the 13th. Sudan's mainstream opposition is boycotting the elections, which are widely expected to extend the rule of President Omar al-Bashir. Under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Salman Sabah al-Salam Sabah, Minister of Information and Minister of State for Youth Affairs, Kadma Club organized the final festival of the Joint Clubs Training Project. The ceremony was attended by the Deputy General Director for Sports Affairs, Abdelrazak Al-Khazal, who praised the existing efforts of the contribution between the General Authority of Sports and the Ministry of Education. Nurhan Al-Alfi has the details.
Under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Salman Sabah al-Salam, the Minister of Information and the Minister of State for Youth Affairs, Nadi Kazma assessed the final festival of the Joint Clubs Training Project by the participation of 16 different clubs, whom were eager to present the best sport shows.
The objective of this day, of course, is to encourage our youngsters to have more physical activity and sports than sitting. And having said that, I think this is a very successful day from what we are seeing with different activities, as you can see.
All the best for all our sporting club and our Kuwait sport, and hopefully we are doing our best to improve or to give hand for our sporting Kuwait.
The celebration was attended by the Deputy General Director for Sport Affairs, Ahmed Abdelrazak Al-Khazal, who praised the existing efforts of the contribution between the General Authority for Sport and the Ministry of Education, which had a huge impact on the success of the project through their participation and regular follow-up.
The project is to grasp the attention of the young elite, to join them to the clubs, and this objective need a lot of effort, and thanks God that cooperation finalized today.
After long hard training days, the event came as an evaluation for the players' level and also as a reward for their hard working. The attendance also stressed on the important role of parents as the main supporters for their children. The final festival of the Joint Club Training Project ended today with successful results, by achieving their main aim of highlighting the players' talents in order to encourage them to complete their achievements. From Kazma Club, I am Nurhan Al-Alfi reporting for the English News.
In our final item, we check the local business news where Kuwait Stock Exchange ended today's session on a mixed board as the weight index lost 1.83 points, reaching 423.2 points, while the price index gained 6.82 points, registering 6,213.34 points, and the KSX 15 lost 4.25 points, recording 1,020.17 points. The number of trades amounted to 3,272 transactions worth about 19 million Kuwaiti dinars, with around 136 million shares changing hands. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. Well, with that, we conclude our news bulletin. Thank you for joining us. Have a pleasant time. I'm Mam Power. Before we go, we remind you once again of our main top stories. Have a pleasant time and good night. The cabinet meeting is briefed on the telephone calls by U.S. Secretary of State to the GCC foreign ministers regarding agreement with Iran. Dozens are killed in fighting near Yemen's Aden port, delaying air deliveries. Hundreds of Palestinian refugees in the Yarmouk camp in Damascus flee after fighting intensifies. And Kenya launches airstrikes against militants in Somalia in retaliation for a terror attack in Kenya last week.